Welcome back to Unicycle Basics. My name is Finn, and today we're talking about setup. This is all about changes that you can make to your unicycle to make it fit your body, your riding style, or the terrain that you're in. Unicycles are quite simple. There aren't too many adjustments to make, but we can't change anything while we're riding. We can't change gear, we can't change our suspension because we don't have any. So you're always trying to find a compromise that works in more than just one situation. And that can be a bit complicated again. Either way, let's get started with seat height. Seat height is probably one of the first settings that you're going to make when you get a new unicycle. There's a strong rule for when the seat is too high. When you're sitting in the seat and the pedal is all the way at the bottom, your leg shouldn't be fully extended. There should still be a slight bend left in your knee. For mountain unicycling, you want your seat to be a bit lower than that. That is because to absorb bumps with your legs, it's good to get your butt out of the seat. But if you keep lowering your seat more and more, at some point pedaling is going to feel really inefficient. So you're always trying to find a compromise between pedaling being really inefficient and being able to absorb bumps with your legs. Since this adjustment is quite easy to make, you don't have to find a compromise for everything. Maybe if you're doing a downhill day, you can have your seat a bit lower, and then if you're just going for a big ride without much technical stuff in there, just put your seat a bit higher.
Changing seat height is fairly simple. Just loosen the bolts on your seat clamp, slide the seat up or down, and retighten the bolts. Make sure the seat is straight and don't over-tighten them. It's common to see people stripping the threads in these. You may also have to cut the seat post. Ideally, you would use a tubing cutter, but a hacksaw or an angle grinder works too. Don't cut it too short. For strength, you want the seat post to be at least 1 centimeter past the slot into the frame. It's a good idea to leave some room for future adjustment anyway.
Continuing on the seat, there's also the angle that you can change. So whether the nose of the seat is pointing more upwards or is flatter. The goal here is to get more comfortable on the seat. You want to sit on your sit bones and not any more sensitive areas. So to do that, usually the nose of the seat will be pointing slightly upward. That way, when you're sitting on it, the weight will be in the back on your sit bones. Of course, depending on your personal body geometry, if you point it too far up, it may put some pressure again on sensitive areas. So you need to find a middle ground there. Also, I think this is an adjustment that you need to give some time to test out. You're changing body position a lot on a unicycle, so you can't just go for a lap around the parking lot. You may need more time to figure out if this setting really works for all the body positions you take on when you're riding.
Again, making this adjustment is quite simple. On most seats, there are 4 bolts attaching the seat to the seat post. Loosen them and slide the seat forward and backward to change the angle. Some seats only use a single bolt from the top, but the same principle applies there. Also, some seat posts aren't symmetric, meaning they point more up on one side and more down on the other, giving you a larger range of adjustment by flipping the seat around on the seat post. When you retighten the bolt, do so in an X pattern, tightening them diagonally in pairs.
While we're in this area, let's quickly talk about the brake. I talked about this in the braking tutorial too, but let's go over it here. Use the reach adjust on your brake to set it to a comfortable distance away from your handle, so that you can reach it with your finger and grip the handle. Also, you can play around with the angle of the brake lever. If you're using the plastic handle, maybe invest in a small brake extender that bolts onto your brake lever and makes it more comfortable for you to reach the handle with your finger.
The brake extender I showed you on the left does require a bit of modification to work well. It's also not symmetric, so you can only really set it up for one hand, but I find it gives the most comfortable to use brake setup with the plastic handle. Depending on your model of brake, adjusting the reach may require a small Allen key. Since the brake can hit the ground when you fall, it's a good idea to leave the brake a little loose, so it can move when it hits a rock.
Moving down on the unicycle, let's talk about tire pressure. This is a really commonly asked question: what tire pressure should I be running? And I refuse to talk about absolute numbers here. It really depends so much on your riding style, your terrain, your weight, the specific model of tire you're using. Even if I gave you a range, that would be so big, but it's pretty much useless anyway. But I can give you a few rules. If the rim hits the ground while you're riding with one obstacle, then you need to add more air. Pretty obvious, I guess. But if you're landing your biggest drop and your rim just about touches the ground when you land on a small stone, you might get away with that. If it happens more often, you're just risking pinch flat tires, and then you should add more air before you get to that. Also, when you're going around a corner and it feels really spongy because your unicycle is moving around on the tire, you should also add more air to get the unicycle to be more stable then. On the other hand, tires are pretty much our only suspension. So, if you feel every tiny imperfection on the trail, maybe consider letting some air out of the tire so that it can do its job and absorb some small bumps for you so you don't have to. It's really about finding a compromise here.
Tire construction is a big factor in how little air you are able to get away with. I like tires with a strong sidewall. They are heavier, but are much less likely to pinch flat or become floaty in corners when you lower the tire pressure. When you are filling up your tire at home, I would always recommend leaning towards putting too much air in. It's much easier to let it out later than to put some more in on the trail.
Last on my list is crank length. Technically, this is more of an upgrade because you're changing out parts, and I'll make a future video about upgrading your unicycle. But this is so commonly done and so important that I think it's worth it to talk about it here. As a general range, you'll find 110mm cranks at the very short end and 150mm cranks at the long end of what people commonly use on mountain unicycles. Longer cranks give more leverage, which makes it easier to go uphill. It gives you more control through your feet, but as a downside, it's harder to spin them fast, so you're potentially going a bit slower. On the other side, shorter cranks, potentially you're going a bit faster. I say potentially because obviously you still have to put in the work. It's not magically making you faster, it just gives you a higher potential for speed. You're giving up some control with shorter cranks. You have less leverage. Some of that control can be replaced with the brake, especially when you're going downhill. As you get more skilled with that, maybe you can run shorter and shorter cranks. And another advantage is it's less likely to hit a stone with the pedal. If you live in a really rocky region and you ride along trails, when you're pedaling along, your pedal may hit the stone and just throw you off the unicycle. The shorter cranks, the pedals are more up and you're less likely to hit something. This is another advantage that I think a lot of people overlook. In general, I would recommend starting longer with the cranks, and then as you progress, you're able to go faster and faster. Try out shorter and shorter cranks.
If you change out crank length a lot, multi-hole cranks are a good idea to make changes easier. I personally value being used to my setup very highly, so I don't really change it up that often. Sometimes the best setup is simply the one that you're most experienced on.
That's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed watching and you learned something. If you have further questions, ask them here in the comments or on the Unicyclist forum or on Unicycle chat on Facebook. See you on the next one.
Unicycle Basics is a passion project for me. I'm doing to try and grow this awesome sport. So if you want to help out, the most important thing you can do is sharing these videos with anyone you think is interested in mountain unicycling. Also, like and subscribe on YouTube, so the YouTube algorithm will feed this to as many people as possible. If you want to help out with money and pay for some of the snacks I consumed when making these videos, and some of the equipment I got, there will be a link in the description.